Hi, welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folktales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle. I am a pizza man. I love pizza. And yeah, I'm here in Mexico City. I have been preparing all day to record, and I have been so unfocused. And I'm kind of I'm just trying my best, people. This has been a really sad time here on planet Earth, but I guess one could argue that it's kind of sad all the time. I have a heavy heart knowing that there are so many children here on this planet that are not safe and are living in fear of war, of abuse, of whatever it may be. And I'm heartbroken. I'm truly heartbroken. I dream and wish that we can build a world where the safety of children is the highest priority, and safety in all ways, safety physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and respected. So today, we will be telling more stories from the incredible book, Speak, Bird, Speak Again. I highly recommend listening to the previous episode if you haven't already, where I go into depth about this book. But in a nutshell, this book is a compiled story, a collection of stories from Palestine. They are folk tales, most traditionally told by women, and these are stories that traditionally are told orally. And so this book, Speak, Bird, Speak Again, is the first recorded version of these stories, and the men who translated it are both Palestinian born and spent quite a long time interviewing different storytellers and compiling the stories into the most common elements and endings, because in oral traditions it's very common for there to be elements that are slightly different, possibly an alternate ending or a detail that changes. So they heard stories from quite a few people and then compiled the stories into the general agreement or like common themes, if that makes sense. But I do really want to mention something I mentioned in my previous episode, but I'm going to repeat this again. Writing stories down is nuanced and complicated, because when a story is traditionally orally transmitted, there is a lot of flair and details that are specific to that storyteller, their region, or even just elements. And something that is lost when things become recorded are those specific details, alternate endings, alternate catchphrases. And that's something that I notice. That's one element of Western society that I find very sad, that books and the written word are taken more seriously, it feels, than oral traditions. And in effect, it actually has erased so many stories and details. I mentioned Disney in my previous episode, because there are so many stories that we grew up hearing that in effect are, magical fairy tales, but also are stories that have been bastardized, details changed, even, altered for children. And a lot of these folk tales, even if they were told to children, had very adult themes. And a lot of those things have been erased as well as the cultural context. That is a huge one. And I think it's unfathomable for us from the West to even understand how much cultural context has been erased. This is slightly off topic, but I highly recommend everyone watch a movie called The Spine of Night. I just watched this recently, and it was such an incredible film. Everyone should watch it, especially white people and everyone. But in a nutshell, this movie is about a priestess from the swamps. This is an animated film. This woman is a priestess living in a swamp, and in the first 5 minutes of the movie, her entire tribe is slaughtered, and she is taken to a city. And this feels very medieval. The iconography and the styles, and everyone is white. Actually, that's not true. There are some people of color in the movie, but they are a minority. These are like white masses. Okay, so she's taken to this city. It feels very medieval, and she's naked. Everyone else is clothed. And long story short, she is able to do magic with the help of this necklace, this feathery necklace she's wearing. It's blue, and you actually find out they're not feathers, they're leaves. And with these blue leaves, which grow in the swamp, she can do magic. And basically, this is a story. I feel like I'm telling this poorly. This is a story about this blue flower, and she uses the magic of this blue flower to find where it comes from, which is high in the mountains. And she goes on a quest to find where this flower comes from, and ends up meeting a man who guards this flower. And throughout the story are these elements of, honestly, like, quote unquote masculinity and femininity. This woman who is naked and a priestess uses this flower for healing and for ceremony, and in the hands of men, they use it for massacre, blood sacrifice, for power. And eventually a man who she ends up helping kills her to take this necklace off of her and use her blue flowers to create a city built on blood, built on human exploitation, and built on sacrifice. And religion is a really big part of these civilizations. They are taught to worship the king, and they are taught to worship the priests. The king and the priest being better, being higher ranking, being the apex of authority. I think that's a plane, or yeah. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because I think that for white people, it's hard to imagine white society without a major religion such as Christianity. But there's other religions. I'm using Christianity as the biggest example because I think when people think of Western Europe, when they think of Spain, when they think of Italy, when they think of France, I think when we think of these cultures, we think of them practicing Christianity. And all of those cultures once had native culture. They had what the Christians call pagan religions, but they were they had local practices, local festivals. A very common example is in the winter, the Festival of Lights. And almost all over Europe, they would have festivals of lights during the darkest time of year, during the solstice. And when Christianity became common, they co-opted that festival and made it Christmas. Studies show that if Jesus was real, if Yeshua was a person, he was actually born around the spring equinox and not in winter. But because Christians were trying to eliminate, quote unquote, like pagan holidays, they made Christmas around the Festival of Lights, which was one of the biggest holidays. What I'm getting at is that a a lot of these ancient religions and ancient cultures were orally transmitted. That sounds like a venereal disease. Were oral traditions. Oral tradition is the ancient practices, like that's not specific to any culture. Every single culture had oral traditions, and it was common for elders to share stories with children and the people at night around a campfire or after eating. Stories have been a way to entertain each other, but also to teach each other, to tell stories of the past, to tell stories of crimes, of scandal, and also to share with children like dangers of the world. It's like a lot of these stories are incredibly violent and scary, and have elements of magic and betrayal and like these things that are very human, but I think important to learn about, because as we all know, as we become older, we become aware of the dangers of the world and the risks of being a human being on the planet, the risks of meeting strangers and the secrets and the lies that they may tell. And this movie, The Spine of Night, really made me emotional because I think I've only met one person. I met a Welsh woman once who came from a very small village in Wales. And I met her on May Day. May Day, May 1st, is in ancient European cultures considered like the first day of the year. And I was at like a tattoo studio, I think, and they were having an opening at this tattoo studio. And this Welsh woman was like, "Do you guys not celebrate May Day?" And I said no. And she said that in Wales, in her village, it was a really special day, and they had a huge bonfire, and everyone got together. And she was telling me about singing, and that they believed that singing connected you to the other realms, and that there were some people who were naturally born with the gift of being able to exist not only physically, but to exist also in the spirit world. But for some people without that ability, singing was their bridge to the spirit world. And so singing in unison was their way of connecting everyone with the spirit world on May 1st. And when she told me all of that, I just felt so robbed. Like, I don't know anything about my family. I don't know anything about my ancestors and the types of things that they were doing pre-Christianity. I honestly don't really have any information about my ancestors past my great-grandparents. I have no idea what their personalities were like. I have no idea what their religious beliefs were like. And pre-Christianity, I have no sense of what my ancestors were up to. I could go on Wikipedia and guess, but I don't actually know. These things used to be shared as stories from grandparents, from parents, from aunties, from uncles. And the written word has, in a sense, preserved some parts of our human history and erased many more. So I feel like that was a long rant, but I think that's a really big reason why I started this podcast, because though we have so much information to read about, I don't think we often question the integrity of what we have access to, and I don't think we question how much was omitted. I honestly don't know that much. I'm just a guy. I have my intuition, but besides that, I'm working with what I have, which are English translations of things. Whatever I'm looking up is already being translated and bastardized. So part of why I started this podcast is I wanted to build a community. I want to hear from people who have ideas. I want to hear from people that did hear stories from their moms or dads or grandparents growing up. I want to know. I want to create a community. I want to start a discussion. So without further ado, I will be telling more stories from this book, Speak Birds Speak Again. Sadly, the book is copyrighted, so I cannot read word for word this book. And so I will be telling my own version, which is a huge bastardization. I'm telling it in my words, but I really just want to get everyone interested. This book is worth reading. It's worth purchasing. The men who wrote it are the men who translated it are both Palestinian, and it is special and rare to have a book of folk tales directly from people who heard these stories and translated them into English as native speakers. So this book is a treasure trove. I highly recommend you purchasing it and supporting people of Palestinian descent. Regardless of what happens, the Palestinian people and Palestinian culture will not be forgotten. I'm going to repeat a part of a quote that I said in my last episode because I found it to be so arresting and crucial. So here I go. There was once an area of the world called Palestine, where the Arab inhabitants had and have a distinctive culture all their own. It is that culture that is preserved so beautifully in the magical stories contained in this volume. In this context, all people, regardless of political persuasion, should be able to appreciate the value of these magnificent folk tales as oral products of the creative spirit of the human mind. They belong not just to the Palestinian Arab community, but to all humankind. I really want that to sink in. While we separate each other with borders, with beliefs, with skin color, with whatever the fuck excuse that people have for separateness, I don't want us to forget that humankind is an extended family, and it is all of our duty to respect each other and preserve our arts. Art of all kinds is the most precious thing that we have as human beings. Stories, paintings, carvings, architecture, clothing, songs. I mean, the list goes on. This is the most beautiful treasure we have as humanity, and it belongs to no one, but it should never be destroyed, and we should never be silencing each other. So this is my attempt to stir something deep inside of you to get interested in stories. Okay, so without further ado, here I go. The first story that I will be telling today is a story called Half a Halfling. So, there was once a man, and he was married to 2 women. One of the women was his first cousin. The other woman was a stranger. And both of these women could not conceive. So, naturally, this man went to the local sheik. The sheik being the healer of the town, often known to use herbal magic, sometimes exorcisms, sometimes blessings. And he goes to this sheik and he asks him for help. The sheik says, I recommend you going to the mountain. On this mountain lives a ghoul, and you will ask this ghoul for 2 pomegranates so that your wife can conceive. The man sets out to this mountain. He walks to the top and he finds this ghoul. Immediately, he trims the ghoul's beard and eyebrows. This is a sign of respect. By grooming the ghoul, you are showing respect. After he grooms this ghoul, he says, "Peace to you." The ghoul replies, and to you peace. Had your salam come before your request, I would have munched your bones so loud, my brother who lives on the next mountain would have heard it. What do you want, human? And the man asks for 2 pomegranates so that his 2 wives can conceive. The ghoul suggests that the man go to the next mountain and asks his brother for the 2 pomegranates. So the man embarks on his quest. He walks to the next mountain where he finds the brother of the ghoul. And he does the same thing. He trims his beard, he trims his eyebrows, and he says, peace to you. And the ghoul says, and to you peace. If you had not said your salam before your request, I would have munched your bones so loud that my sister on the next mountain would hear. What do you want, human? And he asks for the same thing. He says, I'm looking for 2 pomegranates so that my wife can conceive. And the ghoul says, I got you. You're going to go to the next mountain and ask my sister for these 2 pomegranates. So the man embarks on his quest. He goes to the next mountain. He climbs to the top and he finds a ghoul. A ghoul is a female ghoul. She is grinding wheat with her breasts thrown over her shoulders. Love. I just want to interject. I love ghouls. I love trolls. I'm obsessed. So this woman, this ghoul, is my dream come true. Okay, so this ghoul is at the top of the mountain grinding wheat with her breasts thrown over her shoulders. The man walks right up to her and he sucks from her right breast, and then he sucks from her left breast. And then he puts a handful of flour in his mouth. Okay, why is he sucking from her breasts, you ask? That is a fantastic question. So in this book, again, this is why this book is amazing, because it has so many footnotes and anecdotes that kind of give you the cultural context that without it you would be wondering, like, why is he sucking from this ghoul's breasts? So in Islamic culture, especially like a long time ago, I don't know if this is still culturally relevant, but to suck from the breast of the woman, you in a sense become like one of her children. You become equally as dear as one of her children. And in fact, if 2 babies breastfeed from the same woman, even if they're not blood siblings, they are considered, quote, milk siblings. So in the future, when they are adults, they would not be allowed to marry. So that's just some context into why he chose to suck from the breasts of the ghoul as a way to basically become like an adoptive son. And this ghoul says, who has suckled from my breast? You are more dear to me. Oh, okay, this is worth reciting. You have sucked at my right breast, and now you are dearer to me than my son, Ismail. You have sucked at my left breast, and now you are dearer than my son, Nasar. And now that you have eaten my flour, you are dearer than my own children. What can I do for you? And he says, I want 2 pomegranates that I can feed to my wives so that they can have children. And the ghoul says, okay, I got you. You're going to go to that orchard. And in the orchard, you will find a ghoul sleeping. And he will be using one ear for a mattress and the other for a blanket. Oh my God, that's so cute. These would be great illustrations. So the ghoul says, you're going to see the ghoul sleeping. And you're going to pick 2 pomegranates and run away as fast as you can. So the man says, okay, I got you. He goes to the orchard. He sneaks past the ghoul who is sleeping. He picks his 2 pomegranates and he runs home. On his way home, he becomes hungry. And he thinks, I could eat part of my cousin's pomegranate because she is my cousin and she won't be mad if I only offer her half a pomegranate. What an asshole move. So he decides to eat half of his cousin's pomegranate. And when he gets home, he gives the whole pomegranate to the wife, who is a stranger, and he gives half a pomegranate to his cousin. So both of his wives become pregnant at the same time. The stranger wife gives birth to twin boys. She names one Hassan and the other Hussein. And his cousin gives birth to half a human being. They do not go into details. I don't know what they mean by half a human being. I have no idea if they mean someone is cut in half, if they're short. All they say is half a human being. And they name this child half a halfling. I feel like that's super disrespectful, but as the story goes, the boys grew up. And one day the boys wanted to go hunting. So Hassan and Hussein asked their father for a mare and a gun, a mare being a female horse. Okay, sorry. So their dad is like, I got you. So their dad gets them each a female horse and a gun. Half a halfling asks for a lame and mangy she-goat and a wooden poker. I'm obsessed. So their dad is like, okay, I guess. So he gets him a lame and mangy she-goat and a wooden poker. So all three of the brothers set out to hunt. And Hassan and Hussein, the twins, fire their shotguns multiple times, but they had no luck. They hit nothing. Meanwhile, the third brother, known as half a halfling, had a different strategy. He was laying down and waiting in silence for deers to pass him. And as they came close, he would break their legs with his wooden poker. Okay, brutal yet effective. So the twins are jealous, and I think they're also nervous that they're being upstaged by their brother, who is, in their eyes, less than. So they say, please, brother, give us the deer that you've hunted so that we can take it home and say that we were triumphant. And the third brother says, you know what? Okay, I will, but only on one condition. I will give you the deer if you let me brand your asses. And the brothers agree. Now, branding was a sign of humiliation. Obviously, it's like a sign of like ownership. And so in a way, it is like, quote, like demasculating, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, is it emasculating, demasculating? Comment below. So the brothers agree. Half a halfling takes a brand and brands them on their asses. So they get home that night, and the twins give their mom the deer, who is very proud. She cooks the deer, and she throws the bones on the doorstep of half a halfling's mother. And she starts to cry. She's very sad. And her son comes up to her and he says, Mother, why do you cry? And she says, look, your brothers have successfully gone hunting. They've killed a deer. And you are unable to kill anything. And he says, Mom, like, you're tripping. You have no idea. I killed that deer. Go look at their butts. Go look at their asses. And you will see that I've branded them. I have successfully hunted and not them. So sure enough, his mom goes and looks at the butts of the twins and realizes that her son, in fact, did kill this deer. So the next day, the three brothers went hunting again. And while the sun started to set, they were still quite a bit a ways from home. So they come to another town, and they found no one there except a ghoul chasing a rooster. Apparently, if a woman is chasing a rooster, she has to be a ghoul. This is characteristic of a ghoul. Ghouls are sometimes indistinguishable from humans as they have the ability to shapeshift. So if you see a woman chasing a rooster, she's a ghoul. Which is an odd characteristic, but I love it. Okay, so she says, "Welcome, my nephews. Please come in, have dinner." And so the three brothers said, "Great." And she says, "What do your horses eat?" And the twins say, "Our horses eat hulled barley and pure milk." So the ghoul brought feed for the horses and brought them pure milk. Then she asked half a halfling, "What does your she-goat eat?" And he responded, "Bran left over from sifting and water left over from kneading." So the ghoul prepares those things, and she puts the brothers to bed to sleep on the floor. But half a halfling says, "I cannot sleep on the floor." And he sees a reed basket hanging from the ceiling. And he says, "I would like to sleep in this basket, please." And so the ghoul prepares his dinner. And then half a halfling requests to have a water skin and a handful of fava beans for snacking. So he pierced the water skin and hangs it above his head to drip on him so that he won't fall asleep. And he sits in the basket eating his fava beans. Meanwhile, the ghoul thinks that all the three brothers are asleep. And she starts jumping and singing, "Oh, my teeth get sharper and sharper for Hassan and Hussein and his brother." So obviously she's wanting to eat these boys. Ghouls and ghouls are known to feast on the flesh of humans. So half a halfling cannot allow this. So he says, "How will I sleep? I have no belly in my food. I have no belly in my..." No, that doesn't make sense. "I have no food in my belly." And so the ghoul says, "What can I get you? Because a human is always better with a full stomach." So half a halfling requests. He says, "I would like a stuffed rooster so that I can eat it and go to sleep." The ghoul prepares a rooster for him. He eats it and climbs back in his bed. And again, the ghoul starts chanting, "Oh, my teeth get sharper and sharper for Hassan, Hussein, and his brother." So half a halfling jumps up again, and he says, "How will I sleep if I have no food in my belly?" And so the ghoul says, "What can I make for you?" And he says, "I want a lamb stuffed and roasted." So by the time the ghoul finished preparing the lamb, the sun has risen. And the brothers say, "We would like to have a little shower." So she goes out to fetch them water. And half a halfling warns his two brothers. And he says, "We all better get up and bounce because this lady is a fucking ghoul and we're not safe here." So they all get up. They run away. And they get on their horses. But as they're leaving her house, the ghoul comes back and she incites a spell. She says, "Oh, milk, thicken, thicken, and tie up their joints so that they can't move." And the horses immediately stop and don't budge. So the twin brothers get off their horses and they get on the lame she-goat belonging to half a halfling. And all three of them ride off back towards their home. And as they get home, their father is very pleased with half a halfling because he was the one who was able to deliver them from danger. And half a halfling says to his father, "What would you say, father, if I were to bring back this ghoul right here?" And his father said, "Well, if you were to bring back this ghoul, I would confess that you are more clever than both of your brothers." So half a halfling sets off. He goes and buys a donkey, and he loads it with a huge box filled with halva. Halva is a classic snack. It is a sweet treat that comes from the Persian Empire, but now it's very common in the Middle East and South Asia. And the recipes can vary, but it's most commonly made out of flour, butter, oil, saffron, rose water, milk, cocoa powder, and sweetened with sugar. It often has like rose petals on top, or sometimes can be served with mashed dates or milk, sometimes even pistachios. And yeah, it's like a yummy little sweet treat. Okay, so half a halfling goes to the neighboring town where the ghoul lives, and he says, "Halva, halva, I have a bunch of halva." And the ghoul comes out, and he has a huge box. And so he gives her a little piece and she gobbles it up. And then he gives her another piece and she gobbles it up. And so then he suggests, "Oh, why don't you get in this box and you can eat as much as you want and I'll charge you after." So she's like, "Fuck yes." The ghoul gets in the box. She starts stuffing her face. And without noticing, he takes her back to his village, to his house. And when he gets home, he says, "Light the fire and let the flames rise. I've brought the ghoul herself. And let him who loves the prophet bring a load of wood and a burning coal." And the ghoul says, What? What the fuck did you say?" And he says, "Oh, don't worry. I just said, spread the silk and put the silk away. I've brought you the princess, daughter of the prince." And so as she stuffs her face, they throw the ghoul on the fire and rid themselves of her evil. And that is how the story goes. Again, what's interesting about this story is really a very common theme of the underdog, of the less favored son, the less able son, the son who is looked over being the most clever. A really big takeaway from this story is about the actions of a person and the quality of their deeds. So, a big reason why I told that story was actually because this is allegedly a really common story told in Palestine to children, and a big takeaway being that regardless of who you are or your popularity, that your cleverness really is your saving grace. Okay, I'm going to tell one more story. This is the story of the orphan's cow. So, there was once a man who was married to a woman, and they had a son and a daughter. Sadly, his wife passed away, and though they did not have a mother, their father said, "I shall give the cow to my son and daughter as a companion." So the son and daughter befriended this cow. They loved this cow and they spent every day with it. And meanwhile, their father remarries, and his new wife becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to a son. And she gets pregnant again, and she gives birth to a daughter. And this new wife fed her children only the best food, and the orphan children, she fed them nothing but bran. This is the classic fairy tale evil stepmother. So the orphan children, who, it's interesting in the story, they're actually referred to as orphan children, but they're not, their dad's still alive, but whatever. The orphan children, eating nothing but bran, were still very healthy and rosy-cheeked. And every day, these two siblings would roam with their cow in the countryside. And when they were far away from home, they would say to their cow, "Open, O our cow." And the cow, like pretty crazy, the space between its horns would open and meat and rice would come out and the kids would eat their fill. And when they get home, they would eat their bran, but in resentment of their evil stepmother because she was a bitch. Okay, so one day the stepmother was noticing that the orphan children were slightly plumper and had rosier cheeks than her own children. And so she knew that something was going on and she could not take it. So she instructs her son. She says, "Tomorrow I want you to follow your orphan siblings out into the countryside and I want you to spy on them and I want you to tell me what they eat." So the boy follows the orphan children the next day into the countryside. And the two orphans obviously don't want to skip their meal. So they turn to their brother and they say, "Listen, we're about to eat, but do you promise not to tell anyone what you saw?" And their brother's like, yeah, like, don't even worry. So they turn to their cow and they say, "Open, O our cow, we want to eat." And the cow offers them meats and rice from the space between its horns. And all the kids feast. So when they get home, the mother says, "What did they eat? Tell me. And her son says, "Oh, nothing. The only thing we had was the dry bread that you gave us this morning." And she's like, "Bullshit. I know that you're lying to me. Tell me." And her son plays dumb. So the next day, she instructs her daughter. She says, "Okay, I want you to follow your orphan siblings into the countryside and I want you to tell me what they eat." So the daughter says, "I'm on it." She follows her siblings out into the countryside. They go through the same drill. They say, "Do you promise not to tell anyone?" And she's like, yeah. Don't even worry. So they have the cow feed them. And the girl eats a bite and then every other bite saves the meat and rice in the front of her dress. And that evening when they get home, their mother asks, "Okay, what did they eat?" And the daughter shows her. Now, I do want to say that in one of the footnotes, there is like an ancient belief that women can't keep secrets. So that's like kind of a bummer because we all know that's not true. But, you know, hinting at an alliance between the mother and the daughter. Okay. So this evil stepmom has a plan. She pretends to get sick. She boils straw and bathes in it, and it like turns her skin a little yellow. And she goes to sleep. And the children are worried. They're like, "Mom, what's going on?" And she's like, "Don't talk to me. I'm sick." And so then her husband comes home and he's like, "Wife, what's happening?" And she's like, "I'm sick. I've been told that I'm uncurable. Nothing can cure me except you killing the cow." And her husband says, like, "What? Like, I can't kill the cow. My kids love that cow. That's like their only friend. Like, I'm not going to kill the cow." And this evil stepmom is like, "I don't give a fuck. You're going to kill the cow." And the husband obliges them. So he kills the cow and they eat her, and the orphans lament. They cry. And they realize that they have to leave. There's nothing, you know, like they're not going to eat. So they run away. And on their journey, they meet a shepherd. And the sister, being older, feels responsible for her brother. And her brother starts saying, like, "Dude, I'm hella thirsty." So the sister goes up to the shepherd and she says, "Uncle, do you happen to know a place for us to drink water?" And he says, "Listen, up ahead, you're going to come across 2 springs. Drink from the lower one, but do not drink from the upper spring because a gazelle pissed in that spring. And so if you drink from that spring, you will turn into a gazelle. So the girl says, thank you. And sure enough, they find these springs. They drink from the lower spring and they quench their thirst. But now the boy is curious and he says, okay, I think we should go to the upper spring and drink from it because I have to know. I have to know, like, are we really going to turn into gazelles? And the sister pleads with her brother. She says, please don't drink from the spring. Like, this is a super bad fucking idea. But her brother does so anyway, and he turns into a gazelle. And so the sister is heartbroken. She leads her brother away, who's now a gazelle. She's crying and crying and crying, and she ends up in front of the walls of a palace. And she sits down next to her brother and she cries. Up in the palace, however, a servant girl looks down and sees her crying. And she turns to her master, who is the king. And she says, King, down by the palace walls, there's a beautiful girl, and I think that you would very much like her. So the king says, call for the girl. So they send servants down, and they say, hey, the king would like to see you. And the girl says, I have a gazelle with me. And the servants offer her to tether her gazelle down below and to have her come meet the king. And the girl insists. She's like, nah, I need to bring my gazelle with me. I'm not going to go anywhere without my gazelle. So they say, okay, that's cool. Bring your gazelle. So she goes upstairs with her gazelle and she stays. She stays for 1 month, perhaps 2. Only Allah knows. So finally, one day, the king says, dear woman, would you rather have me as a brother or as a husband? You know, he's basically testing the waters. He's like, am I your friend, or like, are we finna get married? And she's like, I would love to marry you. Let's fucking do it. So they get married and she becomes pregnant. And meanwhile, he sets out on the Hajj being the journey to Mecca, the religious pilgrimage. So she's left at home pregnant. And meanwhile, the women of the palace become jealous of her because she's about to have a baby with the king. So they arrange for her to be killed. They drop her in the well while she's pregnant. That's like a pretty fucking asshole move. And, oh my God, I forgot. Not only do they drop her in the well, but the king mentions that when she has her baby, he's going to gift her with a lamb. So they drop her in the well, they slaughter the lamb, eat it themselves, and they bury its skin under the floor of the house. But every time they feed the gazelle walks over with a mouthful of food and drops it into the well. So the king eventually returns from his Hajj and he says, where's my wife? And the women say, oh, it's so sad. She died. She was so dear to us, but we've dug a grave for her. The king is heartbroken, but he notices that every day the gazelle walks over to the well and drops food into it. Originally, he thinks, what use is this gazelle to us now that my wife is gone? We should eat it. But he's very puzzled that this gazelle seems to be only eating some of its food and dropping some of its food in the well. So he follows it. And one day, and that day when he follows the gazelle to the well, the gazelle speaks. And it says, oh, my little sister, oh, Budur. And fun fact, Budur is actually not a name commonly used for women. It is sometimes a boy's name, but it's the plural of Badir, which means full moon. Oh, I want my name to be full moon. And okay, so the gazelle says, oh, my little sister, even though it says older sister. Oh, my little sister, oh, Budur. For me, they've sharpened the knives and raised the pots over the fire. And his sister calls back from inside the well, "Oh, my little brother, oh, Kudur." And Kudur is plural of kidre, which means clay pot. And the plural often refers to fate or destiny. And also, this is not commonly used as a name. Okay, so the sister calls back, "Oh, my little brother, oh, Kudur, my hair is so long, it covers me. In my lap sits the son of the king, and the whale has swallowed me." And the king is like, "What the fuck? Are you still alive?" So he calls back into the well and he's like, "Are you still alive down there?" And she says, "Yep, like I've been down here for a minute." So they lower down a strong man in the village to come and save the girl. And the king brings up his wife, sees his child, and he's asked his wife to tell her the story. So she tells him exactly what happened. She explains that she and her brother drank from a spring. Her brother had turned into a gazelle, and that while he was gone on his pilgrimage, that the women of the house dropped her into the well. So the king is fucking outraged, and he decides to make it right. So he takes the gazelle back to the spring and he has him drink from it again. And sure enough, he magically turns back into a human. And then he gathers his mother, his sister, and his servant. And he announces that he who loves him will bring back a lap full of wood and burning coal to the center of town. He lights a big fire and he burns alive his own mother, his sister, and his servant as punishment for trying to kill his wife. And they lived happily ever after. A classic story of betrayal. I love these stories. I love them because I love elements of magic and betrayal. They make for the best tales. They're riveting. Let's see. We're at an hour. Should I tell another story? I'm going to tell one more. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Should I tell this one or should I tell... Okay. I've decided. I'm going to tell this story. This story is called The Green Bird. And this story actually is where the title of the book comes from. So I think it will be an appropriate way to end our storytelling session. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a man. And this man had 2 children. He had a boy and a girl. And the mother of these children sadly died. However, he had a neighbor who was also a widow, and she was into their dad. She was trying to get married, you know what I mean? So every day she was going up to the children, and she was always like putting ideas in their head. And she would always say like, is your dad married? Why doesn't he have a new wife? And so, she would say like, why don't you ask him? You should tell him to marry his neighbor. So the kids would always go to their dad and say, "Dad, like, why aren't you remarried?" And he's like, "Ugh, I'm not ready to remarry. I'll remarry when you're older." And they would say, "Well, why don't you marry our neighbor?" And he'd say, "You guys are still too young. I'll get married once you're old enough to fill the water jug." So the kids would report back to the neighbor. And so the neighbor would start filling the water jug and say, "Tell your dad that you filled it yourself." So they'd say, "Oh, Dad, I filled the water jug." And he'd say, okay, I will remarry when you're old enough to knead the bread. So the neighbor would knead the bread dough and give it back to the kids. The kids would say, "Oh, look, Dad, we've kneaded the dough. We're old enough for you to remarry." And he'd say, no, I'll remarry when you're old enough to cook. So this song and dance continued. The neighbor kept doing all these household chores so that the kids could pretend that they did it. And finally, their father married the neighbor. He's like, fuck it, I don't care. So he marries the neighbor, and sure enough, she fucking switches up on the kids, and once they're married, she starts beating the kids, which fucking sucks, dude. Like, why you have to be such a dick? I feel like this is like the age-old fairy tale situation of like the evil stepmom. But, you know, one thing that I mentioned in my previous episode that I think is common in like ancient cultures is that, you know, mothers were often concerned that their kids wouldn't get the inheritance. So, you know, like maybe a big reason why this was such a common theme is that the new mother, the stepmother, would want her children to get the inheritance even though that they were younger, especially if one of the older kids was a boy. You know, often the first son is promised the inheritance. So, you know, just some insight into this trope. Okay, so one day the husband says, "Wife, I have been craving for stuffed tripe." Okay, just some context here. Tripe. If you don't know, tripe is intense. Tripe is intestines. And in this case, stuffed tripe would be a very laborious meal to make because basically you would have to get the intestines of an animal, clean them, and then cook them, and then also cook like all of the other meat to stuff it with. So this is like an all-day task. So he purchases her the tripe and goes to work plowing the fields. And so the wife spends all day scrubbing the intestines, preparing the food, stuffing them with food, putting it over the fire. And she goes to sweep the floor. And after she sweeps for a little bit, she thinks, I should check on the food. So she goes and looks at the food, and it looks so good that she picks up a big piece of meat and she eats it. And she closes the pot and goes back to cleaning. And after a couple more minutes, she's like, I should check the food again. So she goes and she opens the pot and she has another huge bite of food. And here she continues in this little game where she cleans a little bit and she keeps, quote unquote, checking on the food, and she keeps eating a bite. And eventually she eats the entire dinner. And she realizes, fuck, like I'm fucked. I'm going to be like dead if I don't have dinner. Like my husband just bought me all this meat. I've eaten all of it. Like what the fuck am I going to do? So she sits and she thinks. And she says, "Oh, daughter, why don't you call your brother for me?" And immediately the girl knows that her stepmother is up to deception. So the daughter calls to her brother and she says, "Hey, brother, come and don't come. Come and don't come near, for they've sharpened the knives in front of the shop doors." Really what she's saying is like the butcher is ready, sharpening the knives in front of the shop doors. Like that's basically what the butcher does. So basically this daughter is saying like, bro, I'm calling you, but don't fucking come home. Cause like it's going to be a bloodbath. So she goes back inside and she says, "Oh, stepmother, my brother's nowhere to be found." And so the stepmom's like, "I don't give a fuck. You're going to go call him again." So she calls for her brother again. She quote unquote calls for him. She warns him not to come home. But finally the stepmother says, "I will kill you if you don't get your brother back home." So she calls for his brother. He comes home and their stepmother cuts him into pieces and cooks him into stuffed tripe. Just fucking dark. So dark. So the sister is fucking freaking out. She's crying and crying and crying. And her stepmother says, "Consider yourself dead if you tell your father or anyone about what's happened." So finally, the dad comes home. He is excited for dinner, and the stepmom serves them the tripe of the son. Obviously, the daughter's not eating. And her dad's like, "Won't you eat?" And she says, "No, I'm full. I already ate earlier." And the stepmom is like, "Yeah, don't even fucking worry. Like, please just eat your food." And finally, their father's like, "But where's my son? doesn't he want to eat? And the stepmom says, oh, don't worry. He already had his dinner and now he's outside playing. So the dad says, all right. So he eats his dinner and he goes to bed. And for the next while, the father leaves early in the morning to go plow the fields, and the stepmom continues to lie to her husband. And every day when he comes home, she claims that their son has already eaten and is now playing in, So the sister's fucking depressed and heartbroken. And after the original dinner, she takes the bones of her brother and she digs a hole at the edge of their garden. And every morning she would cry over the bones of her brother. And she would just cry there all day until she had no more tears, and then she would return home. So, fast forward. Eventually, one of their neighbors in the village has a wedding. Everyone in the neighborhood really puts on their best clothes. They get ready for the wedding. But on this particular day, the sister thought to herself, today I'm going to dig up the bones of my brother and just look at them again. So she goes to the edge of the garden. She digs at the bones of her brother. But instead of her brother, she finds a marble urn. And so out of curiosity, she digs deeper. And under the ground is a green bird. And this bird flies away. And she's like, oh my God, like what kind of magic is this? So she opens the marble urn, and inside of it she finds golden bracelets, golden rings, and earrings. And she also finds a beautiful dress that was a sight to behold. So she puts on the dress, and she puts on all the jewelry, and she shows up to the wedding, and everyone is like, oh my God, you look amazing. And she looks so amazing that no one even recognizes her. So, as the wedding continues, the green bird comes over and circles the head of the bride. And the bird says, I am the green bird who graces this gathering. My stepmother slaughtered me and my father devoured me. Only my kind sister, Allah shower mercy on her, gathered up my bones and saved them in the urn of stone. And so now all the people at the wedding are like, what? Like, look at this bird. It's fucking talking. And everyone's like forgetting about the wedding at this point. And they say, speak, bird. Speak again. How beautiful are your sweet words. And the bird says, I'm not going to say anything fucking else until that woman over there, which is the stepmom, until that woman opens her mouth. So the stepmom opens her mouth and the bird drops in a handful of nails and needles. And she swallows them and she dies. Boom, revenge. Now the wedding party is like, okay, speak, bird. Speak again. Let us hear your beautiful words. And the bird said, nah, fuck that. I'm not speaking again until that man, who's his father, opens his mouth. So his father opens his mouth and the bird drops in a handful of needles and nails, and he too dies. And finally, the crowd is like, please, bird, please speak. Your words are so beautiful. And he says, I will not speak anymore until that girl over there opens her lap. And his sister opens her lap. I think what they mean by that is like makes her lap available. Like, I don't think he means open her legs. Like, definitely not. Okay, so the green bird lands in her lap and he transforms back into a boy. And she and her brother live happily ever after in their home together. Interesting. A lot of these stories are about like the cruelty of adults, specifically like the cruelty of the stepmother. But one thing I found so interesting about the story is that like their dad was technically guilty for eating his son, but like he didn't actually know. But I am noticing like a really interesting theme in these stories. Like, it's clear that these stories do appeal to children because a lot of the stories end in siblings living happily ever after without parental supervision. And like, honestly, that really speaks to me. Like, I think that's a really common thing in fairy tales in general. And I think, like, allegorically, it's so meaningful because, like, right, adults are the ones that lived in the world of the wicked. Adults are the ones who are, like, traumatized and traumatizing the children. And so allegorically, that really resonates with me because children are pure-hearted and pure-spirited and are kind of like only the pure ones left. It feels really good. It feels really good to read fairy tales, and it feels really good to be learning and reading stories of Palestine, because there is a huge genocide happening right now, and there are people who are being slaughtered, and with them dies their story, the story of their personal life, the story of that they carry with them of their ancestry, and very possibly some of these stories I'm reading now. Obviously, these stories are written in books, but there are other stories that are not written in this book. Folktales, memories, and this is not to be taken lightly. Sadly, there have been many genocides in human history, and sadly, there are many genocides happening right now. If you're listening to this, I really wish for you and for me and for everyone to unpack hatred that lives within us. It's a daily practice to choose forgiveness, and sometimes it's the hardest thing to do, but forgiveness is the pathway away from hatred. Hatred helps no one. Hatred serves nothing except for violence. And so my prayer today is that every person can do some work within themselves to let go of hatred and to let go of vilifying others. Hurt people, and it's never okay. It's never okay to vilify others. This is the hero complex. Have I already ranted about this? Basically, I've been thinking a lot about this, you guys, but this hero complex is like a huge sickness. Like, we have all these stories of superheroes, and like we're obsessed with like the good guys and the bad guys, and this is such binary thinking that is very dangerous. Everyone thinks they're a hero. Newsflash, every single person thinks they're a hero. Some of the worst crimes against humanity and some of the most brutal genocides on this planet have been carried out by people who thought that they were the hero. Now we can look at them as a villain, but how interesting is that they were thinking that they were a hero by killing the villain, right? And so it might be very easy to say, oh my gosh, this person carried out a genocide, they're the villain. And of course, that's like a very easy conclusion. But then by killing them in return, now we have started a cycle of violence. And this is the age-old story. There is the saying, what is it? Isn't this like a Gandhi quote? Like, if we abide by an eye for an eye, we live in a world of blindness. Something along those lines. I'm butchering the quote. My point is, violence is a resolution for nothing. Violence is a resolution for nothing. Violence creates more issue, more conflict. You know, like, would we, if we saw children hitting each other over a marker, would we allow that? No, we would talk to the kids and say, there's something called conflict resolution. We're going to talk about this, or we're going to share the marker, or no one's going to get the marker if we're going to fight, you know? But why is it that we allow adults to bomb, shoot, poison? Like, it's fucking wild. And, anyway, I'm ranting right now, but I have been noticing in a lot of these stories, and some of the stories I didn't get to tell in this episode, but a lot of these stories end with these happy endings where children live without their parents. And I do think that At first glance, these are just fairy tales, but at deeper introspection, I think that they're speaking on something much greater, which is the pure hearts of children and the horrors that can be committed even by parents who love them, And that's something really to think about. So I leave you with that. I love you. I love this planet. And every single day, we can all make a difference. And even if it's a small difference, let us not forget all the people who have had their lives taken from them in Palestine, in the Congo, in Sudan, here in the United States. I'm actually not in the United States. Here in Mexico, literally every country throughout history, people have had their lives taken from them through violence. And regardless if we know their names, if we know what they look like, let us not forget their legacy as we try to navigate through this fucking crazy world. Please choose love. Please choose forgiveness. I love you. You are worth love, and you are worth surviving. I pray that we can live in a world where we focus on loving each other, respecting each other, and creating, enjoying, relishing in the beauty of planet Earth. Over and out.